Hey guys, Paul here over on APS Amplifier. Today I've got a Yu-Gi-Oh theory that I wanted to share with you guys called the 5-year Yu-Gi-Oh theory. I wanted to get people's opinions on this, explain kind of where I think it comes from, what it could be about, if it's true, dissect that a little bit more. I just want to hear everything. So it's been a while since I've done one of these videos, but the reason I thought it was kind of pressing was because Konami recently announced that they are doing an Edison format, or Time Wizard format, but Edison format tournament on the Saturday of Nationals. So that's actually going to be happening next month. And that's a really big deal because Konami has done these Time Wizard formats for a while now, right? Like they've done GOAT, they've done Edison, but it's always sort of been like a public event at YCSs and stuff like that. So really cool. But at the 250th YCS a couple months back in California, the Edison format in particular was extremely popular. A lot of people, signed up to do those public events. I think they ran over 120 Edison format, like kind of just flights at that event. And so I think that gave Konami the confidence to sort of thrust this a little bit more into the mainstream and see if people liked having that alternative format. Because there's a lot of charm in these sort of old style formats, these snapshot formats, I'd like to call them, where people, take a jump back in time to GOAT format 2005 or Edison format back in 2010. There are even some that don't get played quite as much at the tournaments, but that's like Duelist Alliance era in 2014 and in like Toss format in 2019. And what you probably notice about all of these that I was thinking about is that they basically are spaced about every 5 years apart. Not perfectly, but close. And so the way that sort of seems to line up can't be a coincidence, but then also maybe it can. So we start with GOAT format, where this was, April 2005, and it's one of these formats where really I think it's probably the outlier in this whole theory that I'm going to get into, because in GOAT format, I don't know that there's like a load of deck variety. In fact, I know a lot of people today actually criticize the format somewhat because it feels a little bit solved. But I think that people still enjoy GOAT format because they, compare it to chess. The matches feel very back and forth, very strategic. Resource management is, of the essence. So yeah, that was maybe like Yu-Gi-Oh's first like platinum, gold, whatever, we want to call that, like, beloved age. I don't know why exactly people like go back to that one, but that's just the one that we landed on, was April 2005. Then you get to Edison format. I think that's where you start to see a lot of the trends of players' favorite formats come into play here. So Edison format, as you guys know, it's really, really well known for like just its diversity in terms of like, event results, like top 16s, top 32s. You get a little bit of Blackwing, you get a little bit of Lightsworn, you get some Gladiator Beast, you get some Quick Draw, you get some Heroes, and a little bit of everything in between, Cat Synchro, all these different things. And so I think that people really enjoy this format for its diversity and also just for the fact that it's not maybe as sort of archaic feeling as GOAT format is, where it's just so old, but it still feels like, it's still old Yu-Gi-Oh in a lot of ways that people like. There's still resource management. There's still a back and forth. Games don't end in 1 or 2 turns. And I think that the diversity has a lot to do with it too. People just like the idea that they can play one of several different decks. And a lot of the decks around this time sort of exemplified that mid-range sort of style. Like some are a little faster, some are a little slower, some have like, more offense, more defense, a little more control or whatever. But I think just there is a lot of appeal and expression of play, different deck choices. And people can, of course, take modern sensibilities and apply them to these older formats. Then we fast forward to Duelist Alliance era, which actually kind of shares its spot, I would say, with Hat format, because they were both like 2014, but Hat format was sort of that summer 2014 where it was, obviously the Hat deck and like Bujins. Some people really like that. But more so, I think the Duelist Alliance era of like Shadal's, Burning Abyss, and what are the other two? Necros kind of came later, and Cleaforts as well, like that's sort of a mix in there. But basically, this was sort of a format, once again, with like, 4 or so major sort of decks. And none of them were particularly, extremely fast combo decks or extremely slow control decks. You again saw that like mid-range factor, where these are decks that are quite aggressive and have offensive power, but they sort of land more in that like, just middle of the road thing. You can kind of play them how you want. There's a lot of choice here. There's not like one prevailing strategy. And finally, with 2019, at least that would be what I would call the most recent sort of beloved format. That's the toss format, as people call it. Sky Strikers, Salamandrate, Thunder Dragons, Orcus. You can sort of mix in something like Altergeist or whatever in there too if you want. But this was a format that I think people really enjoyed because it was so. I guess it's like a lot of what modern Yu-Gi-Oh is, but not as crazy. I don't know if I'm describing it well. Like, don't get me wrong, Orcus were pretty crazy. They had really long combos and they could set up boards that you couldn't exactly easily deal with. But it never really felt like so unfair, right? There's Orcus Crescendo, there's stuff like Dengirsu protecting their cards, and certainly the quick effect Orcus stuff from Babel could get a little annoying, being able to play in your opponent's turn. But I don't think that anybody really found Orcus to be just abhorrently unpleasant to play against. Same goes for Sky Strikers, a deck that really has managed to stay relevant in Yu-Gi-Oh! In some form or another for years since. But Sky Striker, very beloved, a deck that a lot of people associate with kind of skill in Yu-Gi-Oh! That's the sentiment I hear around it a lot. Sky Striker mirrors are very skillful is the word you get, you'll hear a lot. And then it's a deck that's still a control deck. It didn't kill you immediately. It could sort of sack you if they open with multiple copies of Engage. But generally speaking, Sky Strikers, they play a bit of a tango with you. And the same can be said of Salamandrate, and the same can be sort of said of Thunder Dragon. I mean, Colossus is a bit of a lockout. But still, people look back on this format fondly, and it's something that people like to really go through and play. And I think that while people were playing this format, maybe they didn't exactly feel that way, there's certainly something to be said about the fact that Yu-Gi-Oh! Formats tend to age differently. People will sort of view a format one way while it's happening, where we're always complaining and looking for the next ban list, but then afterwards people sort of look back on these formats fondly. So what can we see in common between all these, give or take GOAT, is pretty much the existence of a diverse meta, the existence of kind of mid-range options that sort of skew a little bit slightly more control or slightly more kind of combo aggression, and I would say also there's something about expression of play in there, which sort of maybe goes with the other point of control mid-rangey decks, where you can sort of play aggro if you want, you can play slow if you want. There's a lot of options, there's a lot of diversity. It's sort of these power circles. But still, it makes you wonder, well, there are formats that are certainly infamous in Yu-Gi-Oh! Why did they not catch on? Some recent examples would be something like, you don't really hear people looking back super fondly on Zodiac format. Yeah, there's occasionally people who free Trident, free Broad Bull, Trident came back, but Broad Bull still banned. There's certainly people who say that, but I think that the Zodiac format was one of those tier 0 formats that people just don't seem to really want to go back to, and understandably, it's a single deck format's no fun. Now, technically it wasn't exactly tier 0, I mean, I would say True Draco was definitely hanging up there with it, but that's also not a deck that people really like. True Draco, as somebody who played it quite competitively at that time, it's not a very fair or fun deck, honestly. I mean, it's a very good deck, but I think it's very broken and just obscenely strong. Another one is the Goki format, U-Link Goki, that was sort of 2018. Really powerful format. There are certainly some players who I think like those sort of high power formats with, your crazy cards like your Firewall Dragon and, the U-Linking, the hand looping and all that stuff. But again, I don't think anybody's clamoring to go back to it, right? And even if you want to look super recently, I don't think people talk the same way about Drytrons or Virtual World or kind of the Adamancipator and Eldritch days. None of these formats seem to really be looked on in a super positive light. So I think those are largely the reasons why. I mean, we can technically go back older, but I still don't hear people talk about really Dragon Ruler Spellbook era as something that they want back. People want the Dragon Rulers unbanned for fun or whatever, but I don't think anybody wants to go back to that format and play it because it was another one of those tier 0 formats. Or, the wind-up hand loop days and Zector, things like that. So, yeah, we don't get a lot of that. Now, I have a sort of theory about what maybe the next golden age would be. According to this, it might be something that's happening, in 2020, could be this year, 2023, 2024. We're in for something good, if you want to look at it optimistically. But the theory that I kind of find is that right now, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is experiencing kind of one of its big power creep surges. I don't think that's a big mystery between Sprite and Tier and Kashtira and all that stuff. It's just looking like there's definitely been a noticeable spike in power level, and yet none of these decks have gotten to exactly coexist. Sprite and Tier Elements were sort of able to exist at the same time, but then Tier Elements got hit really harshly before Kashtira was around, so I don't know. I don't know if this will really be seen as something that people like. I mean, there's elements of it. I know a lot of people like look back on the tier 0 tier format as something that was very skillful if you were a super competitive player, but not really very inviting if you were anybody else. So I don't think that it'll be like beloved in that way. But the one that I was gonna say is I actually think that the branded, just the entire circle of branded cards, that whole Albaz lore, could in some way be like that. Now, not 100%, but if you look at, just all of the different set of branded decks, there were some really big like highlights. People liked the Dogmatica engine a lot, but there are things like Sword Soul really comes to mind as like a super strong one that people seem to respect it as a top tier deck. It's not like a miserable one, give or take like Arch Nemesis Protos or those sorts of cards. The branded deck, like Branded Despia, it's something that has just a lot of lines of play, a lot of flexibility in how it can be built. I think that that might be something that people like to come back to. And even once they got all of their support, even the sort of lower end decks from that lore story, like say Springens or even Ice Jade, like those decks too are also, like Therion, that's another one. Those decks are also pretty well powered and well balanced between each other. In fact, you can even see it a lot if you play Master Duel right now, which I've been playing a lot of, because like all those decks recently got their kind of later lines of support, and that's what a lot of the meta is today, Bestial, Sprite, whatever. But yeah, so I don't know. What did you guys think about this theory? Do you think that there's just something about every 5 years that like just where Yu-Gi-Oh hits like, hits the mark? It doesn't exactly line up with new eras because like the Synchro era started in 2008, ended in 2011. So Edison's just somewhere in the middle of that. But then like Xyz's era, that was 2011 to 2014. So maybe the tail end of it, and then like 2019 basically skips over Pendulum era and kind of goes pretty deep into the Link era. So I don't know that it's like really aligned with like Yu-Gi-Oh's like eras, but maybe it is. I don't know. You guys can let me know. So yeah, that's just what I wanted to talk about. It seems like it's something. It seems like maybe we're in for something good like here in the next year or two of Yu-Gi-Oh. And what's your favorite, I don't know, classic format? What do you think will be the next classic format? It's gonna be it. I'll see you guys in the next one. Fast turn.